Happy Saturday night. It is, it's just the two of us tonight by the looks. Eric is about to be heading to the airport to catch a plane down to his Mexico house, where he will hopefully not be a robot for the next 6 weeks because he'll have decent internet. Saahil had some family thing on. I can't remember what it was. It sounded like he was going somewhere exotic. So it's just the two of us.
Yep.
How's your week been?
And there are oh, busy. So actually, I was, it feels like I was creating slides every day. Probably I wasn't because I was also working with clients and other things. But there are so many things right now which I like with the help of AI. Like I now have a lot of artificial intelligence tools, and I'm trying out new tools every week. Creating new slides on all the different aspects of large solutions. So there were so many things which I were not aware of when I started now creating that backlog, saying, okay, what do I have to document so that people know about it? And it's more than I thought before. Like, okay, this is also something, and this is a practical part of it, and maybe I should dive deeper into that because then people know how I do that. And it's a never-ending flow, or it feels like a never-ending flow at the moment. So this was my main thing, or what occupied my mind throughout the week, just creating more and more slides on the different topics of large solutions. How has your week been?
Uh, busy. Um, to be honest, it started slow. Because I actually Monday I was like hungover from last week because last week was such an intense week. And so I went, I don't really have the energy to start creating again. I didn't have big calls early in the week. So I went, well, I've got 3 streams that I haven't edited and put on YouTube yet. So I went into edit mode. And a lot of Monday and Tuesday was just editing down the streams and discovering how many times I say learning to recognize the sound wave shape when I say and edit some of them out and leave way too many still in. But then towards the end of the week, some good client work, some fun client work, and wrote the blog post, which I will put out sometime this week, that actually starts to take Shaping Agility a little bit more public.
Great.
So it was good. You had I think you said you were going to share that deck on collaboration patterns a couple of times this week. How did that
So
go?
it went well. So that, of course, like every time I'm doing that afterwards, I'm thinking, could I have done that better? And yes, of course, like obviously, and every time that I think about it, I could have done that better. So that also led to a lot of new slides explaining things in more depth or more clearly. But overall, I think when we have a somewhat deeper discussion with the people listening into the large solution ideas, the feedback is usually good. Like, oh yeah, there are aspects that we already do or aspects that could help us. And so it's at that point it feels more like I have to explain it to a level so that, like with the PI planning in SAFe, I have to explain it to a level where people can take that out of the box and start working with it. And it's not just about the concepts anymore. Like, okay, this is how a solution train could look like. Oh yeah, interesting. But okay, how do I set that up? What exactly do I have to do? And this is a lot more like slide consuming, I would say, than just the theoretical part, because then like, or at least for me right now, it feels like I have to take the hands of the people and walk them the first steps. Say, hey, now when you want to start with, for instance, collaboration maps, this is how it starts. Like you have to do interviews or team interviews or workshops, and then you have to draw that somewhere and share the link to with the people who are affected by the collaboration maps and things like that. So for me, this dynamic agility world is a world where I lived in for many years now, and what I started to get a feeling for, or at least a bit of a feeling for during the week, was how far away that is from the perceived world that the people living in when they are implementing like normal agility, like normal Scrum, normal safe implementations. And this takes a lot more guidance, or a lot more like just taking the hand and walking side by side for a couple of steps than I'm usually used to. So this actually opened up a new, how should I say, a, an- a new field for me of like teaching this material. Because up to now it was more like, here are the concepts. Do you find the concepts interesting? Now we are at a different stage. Yes, we find the concepts interesting. Now tell us how to do that exactly.
So is this clients or prospective clients or public audience? Who are you sharing these with?
So clients and also other consulting companies. Like consulting companies are pretty interested. Like I think it's more to have the feeling to be one step ahead of like what the clients are demanding.
Yeah.
And there are several requests from consulting companies. So and I like that because I think that there is a certain feeling in the air that we have to do something in addition. Like everyone could essentially set up an HR release train or a Scrum team or a less unit or whatever, and now we have to offer a new value add for the clients, and this is what I really like. Like we are, I think, in a new wave of agility coming, and this is driven by the consulting companies themselves, because like the last waves, at least from my memory, they weren't really driven by the consulting companies. It was like more a movement within larger companies when someone was interested in Scrum, say at the beginning of the century, and then they set up a couple of Scrum teams themselves. And also when Safe came along, so at the beginning, at least from what I recall, not a lot of large consulting companies were interested in that in the beginning. It took a while until they hopped on that train. No pun intended. And then, and now the thing is different, because the large consulting companies are so invested in agility at that point in time, because the clients are requesting that it's actually something that they are proposing. Like, hey, we want to offer something new in the area of agile to our clients, and this is a real game changer, I think, because this is the first time that it's driven by the consulting companies themselves. I don't
There you
know,
go.
but maybe you have a different opinion on that, but this is just like how I thought about it during the week.
I think for me, if you look back to the early days, the dynamic nature and the in-depth aspect of it was almost innate,
Mhm.
because you either had a pretty passionate self-interest driven thing. I mean, that's how I started with Agile. It was, I read books and we went, let's try this stuff out.
Yeah,
And then
exactly.
we read more books, and then I took myself to conferences, and it was very much us forging our own journey for a single team.
Yep.
Or when there was a sort of company driven adoption, the ratio of coach to team and the level of expertise of the coach, it was pretty common to get one coach per team,
Mhm.
right down in the trenches.
Yep.
And so the amount of tuning work that happened because of the intensity of that relationship and the passion of the coach was really different. When you get to scaling, all of a sudden it's a different metaphor. There just aren't that many passionate career coaches with deep expertise to go around, given the number of teams that companies are trying to mobilize.
Yep.
And as the consultancies come, quite often the staff from the consultancies have been told or encouraged to build that skill set as opposed to have pursued it out of their own innate desire. So it's a different game.
Yep.
Very different
It
world we
is.
live in.
Yeah.
I,
So for me, I was a part of like obviously of a large consulting company. I was part of Accenture, but for me it was like I was driven. I was really personally driven to dive deeper into that. And when I set up the um, the trainee program for the German-speaking countries for Accenture, I was toying around with Scrum and things because I really liked the idea. At that point in time, I didn't really follow the Scrum rules, but I tried out like different aspects of what Scrum proposed and also what extreme programming proposed. So I was
yeah,
more an extreme programming guy in the beginning, and I was wondering how that works outside the field of programming. And we had to coordinate 100 trainers in that program, and they were in different streams like SAP and Java and things. And so this was for me quite interesting, like experimenting with them at that point in time. But you're right, like there were a lot of people then who were just like who had to go that direction because the client requested them, and they didn't really had a personal interest in that at least at the beginning. They
yeah.
were just thrown in that like the client is requesting something, so take a book, read it, and apply it at the client side.
I think the other thing for me that's really changed is in the beginning, every coach came from a technical practitioner background. I was a developer. It felt
Yep.
like a better way to develop software. That's what got me interested. And like you, I was an XP guy. And the notion that you could have a coach who hadn't lived in the trenches on a agile team, figuring out how to do CI/CD, TDD, refactoring to patterns, was just unimaginable. And I remember my first encounter with a enterprise adoption. When I became part of it, they had about 40 coaches. They had
Mhm.
brought in 40 coaches from a variety of agile consultancies. And I just assumed all 40 coaches would be, you know, deeply technical, experts in technical agility. And then I discovered that only 4 out of the 40 coaches had any technical chops whatsoever. And they said, oh no, 36 process coaches. Like, what is a agile process coach? It was, I just couldn't understand the concept that you could be an agile coach who hadn't lived doing software development on an agile team. And and then all of a sudden, all but 4 of a group of 40 coaches have never done agile software development. What?
So for me back then, like my personal story, when um I started as a normal programmer in a waterfall world. Like I was a database architect, and I also programmed C and C++. I also taught that at the university. I programmed Java and others, and I also trained that. So within Accenture, we had a large training program where I regularly trained things like that. And so at the point in time where uh, I really wanted to go into the agile world. I made a commitment to myself saying, okay, if you want to coach that or teach that with others, you really have to experience that yourself. And so, like at that point in time, I was already like setting up the trainee program for Accenture. I also created the database curriculum and things like that. And then I said, no, I want really to step down and to be a part of a software, like a normal software team doing Scrum. And so like this was strange because like I had a lot of people that I worked with before, and then I was just again a programmer. I already had my PhD in electrical engineering, but I said no. If I really want to do that, I have to step down. And then for half a year, I was then a programmer in a Scrum team. I was also a Scrum master. I was a product owner. I was a release train engineer. So I really wanted to learn all the skills from the inside out, not just by reading books or trying to guide people through some theoretical knowledge that I just like made up myself or whatever. And this was a strange period in my life because I knew at a certain point in time it will lead to something. But when I was just like stuck with these mundane problems, saying, okay, now as a Scrum Master, how do I actually encourage the people to also like put their energy, not just following processes, but put their energy into the agile endeavor that we are working on. And so this taught me a lot of lessons, and I'm still I'm still thankful to myself that I made the decision, stepping down and really going through all the roles myself before I then like went into teaching others and becoming the agile methodology lead for Accenture for the German-speaking countries and things. So this was an interesting story, I think.
It's funny the number of parallels because in the 90s, I was a technical trainer and coach. Once upon a time, there was a company called Borland. You probably remember them. A lot of people today
Absolutely.
have never heard of them. And they had a product called Delphi, which was Object Pascal for Windows. And
I use that.
they had a RDMS called Interface that was in the early 90s a competitor to SQL Server when SQL Server was still just a reskin of Sybase. And I was basically Boland's trainer and consultant for Australia for Delphi and Interbase. So I taught the programming classes, I taught the DBA classes, and a lot of my consulting work was a client would get it, or one of Boland's clients would get into trouble. And they would be starting to blame the tool. And Boland would go, it's probably not the tool, it's probably how you're using it. And they'd send me in. And generally it would be, you made the mistake of following Boland's advice on how to use the tool. let me help you with that. And my kind of introduction, like through that, I was reading Craig Larman's books on object oriented design. It's how I first heard of Craig Larman. And my introduction to Martin Fowler was UML distilled.
Oh yeah.
And Boland had hopped into bed with Rational.
Mhm.
Rational had the whole suite, Rational Rose and Friends. And they'd done an integration between Rational and Delphi. And so we'd been through all the Rational training. And it was like, use the tools. And UML looked really cool. And Rational Rose, of course, was like, do all your UML models and we'll do round trip code generation for you. So you
Mhm.
put the model into rows, you generate the code, you fill in the blanks, and we can keep you round trip in terms of the relationship between your code and rows. And I did a project with it, and innately we were using a lot of techniques that I came to recognize later through the XP movement in terms of iterative development. But this project I did with rows and UML models just felt horribly slow. I love the idea of this UML thing for describing the way that application architecture worked, it felt so much slower than just cutting the code. Bit of a whiteboard diagram, bit of a sketch on a bit of paper and go. And I'm like, what's wrong, right? What have I missed? And I'm blaming myself for just not having mastered it. And then I went to, it was a Delphi conference, and Martin Fowler was out in Australia. He was doing they have the pre-conference sessions, and he was doing a pre-conference. I went, I'm going to go and watch Martin and figure out what I have not understood about UML. And then he gets up there, it's like a half-day workshop, and he goes, here's the first trick with UML. You get about 10% of your model on a whiteboard, and then you start coding. And then you go and reverse engineer the UML model out of your code. So you've got an artifact to store, because the true model is going to emerge as your code. And I went, well, that just makes so much sense.
Yeah, it makes.
The mistake I made was putting the whole model in before I started coding. And that was really the introduction to the whole agile movement for me. I went off and I read Patterns of Enterprise Application Architecture. I'm sure you've got that on your bookshelf still somewhere.
Yes.
um, and I started to play with the XP books, and then I had a client who, well, the transition out of that kind of really technical mode for me was my kids. Because, I was living life on the road. I had one kid. I nearly missed the birth of second kid because I was in Sydney. I had my mobile phone off because I was in a big workshop. And I missed the call from my wife, who didn't even know where in Sydney I was, to go, hey, I've gone into labour. And I rushed home. And then I went, this is no good. I nearly missed my daughter's birth. I'm missing the kids growing up. So I jumped down. I went, I'm going to stop the whole flying around training consulting thing. I'm going to go take a gig. And weirdly enough, the gig was with BMW. And I'd been doing some consulting work to them through Bolin. I went, hey, how'd you like me cheaper and full time? And I went in and they went, okay, here's the thing we want you to do. We want to replace our core line of business system of finance. We don't want a big bang transition because of the risk level. We want an incremental transition. I went, how on earth do you think you're going to do that? And they went, no, you're the smart guy. You're meant to figure that out for us. And that sent me, of course, reading more deeply into the agile literature, which was my first exposure. So, then really the emergence back into coaching was 7 or 8 years of just doing it in teams because it felt like a better way to build software. And then I was like, well, the kids are grown up a little bit. Maybe I could get into agile training and coaching, and just take a different lens on it than back when I was teaching people how to do multi-threading. So,
But what you just said, like with your UML experience, that you had the idea that you had to draw that first and then to code it according to what you drew in the first place. I think this is still the predominant problem that we have in the agile world. Like there are so many coaches who want to have it right the first time. This is how we do it, and now follow the blueprint. And it's the same thing with setting up the processes. I think it comes partly from Scrum, because like there was this Scrum mindset for a while, saying you have to follow exactly the rules. Like these are the events, the roles, the artifacts, and you have to follow exactly the blueprint. Otherwise, you're not really doing Scrum. And I think that is still in the heads and the minds of a lot of coaches, saying, yeah, but there are blueprints and we have to follow the blueprints. And otherwise, we are not really doing it right. But doing it exactly like you said, like you start drawing it, maybe you have an idea of the first 10%, the most important parts that you think at that point in time should be addressed first. And then from there, you go step by step, and you learn and you change the drawings while you are experimenting. So this is something that was never codified really in the agile world. It's just something. It's like,
look,
yeah,
I
of
think it
course
was,
you do that.
I think there was a moment where it was codified. I,
Where?
So I think if you go back to when the Kanban community started,
Yep.
most of the Kanban guys that I knew said that Kanban was post-agile,
Yeah, there
right?
was this
That
idea,
that that
yes.
that 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 you would meet them and they would go, "Kanban and agile are different things." And Kanban didn't have the simple recipe Scrum had, right? What was
Yep.
appealing about Scrum was a very simple recipe: follow these steps and you will be agile.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just follow the
It was
rules.
something that you could just buy off the shelf. Don't you didn't have to think twice about it.
But Kanban said, start where you are. It didn't tell you instantly to restructure your teams.
Yeah.
It didn't tell you to vertically slice stories and fit them into 2 week time boxes. It said, study your system of work, identify opportunities, and seek evolution.
Yep.
And so there was no simple recipe in Kanban except to study the work and improve the work, or improve the way the work worked. The trouble was, that's scary because you've got to have the discipline to study the work. You've got to have the discipline to analyze the flow data, identify the opportunities, and shift. And you can
Mhm.
very easily, and what I saw a lot of teams who would pick Kanban instead of Scrum, they'd pick Kanban instead of Scrum because it didn't have these 2 week time boxes. And they'd visualize it, but nothing would change
Yep.
because there was no
So
recipe going change X and change Y. The recipe was develop the discipline to study the way the work works and change the way the work works. And, there were some very, very sophisticated disciplines in that community. I remember looking at various of the spreadsheets the Kanbanistas would pull up going, oh my God, that's amazing. But it was far too scary, and scaling that level of discipline and the people with the expertise to make that discipline actionable as opposed to sounding entirely philosophical and theoretical was really challenging,
yeah.
which I think was what
Yeah.
headed us back into the land of the easy recipes.
Yeah. So maybe I have to rephrase what I said before. Like the codification that was done back then never really took off. Like there was
Yep.
no widespread codification. And I really like the approach, like start where you are. I still do. And with the large solution um, approach, it's still the same, like start where you are. But there was, I think the people were overwhelmed to a degree. Like there was so much going on also in the coding world, like new coding standards, new languages or language libraries coming up, and new concepts of how to code to create code in a better way. Now, it was for most of the normal software programmers, it was, I think, a blessing saying, okay, just like in an hour, tell me all the rules and then I will follow these rules and just let me code. I'm not really interested in all the theory behind that. So it was not a good, like what we now have in technical architecture. There are highly educated technical architects who make, if they are doing a great job, make the world of the coders a lot easier. And this is something that I'm still missing in the agile world, like this large this large pattern library that we have in technical architecture, and also this very well educated people who had studied that at university and who were like years in the matter before they even became technical architects within their companies, and then they could like in the technical area, if you have a real good technical architect, then this guy could really make the life of the people, the life of the programmers a lot easier. And this is something that we yet have to create a good discipline, I think, in the agile world, doing that, like creating organizational architects the same way that we are minting technical architects.
I I think the the technical architecture piece is an interesting part of that puzzle too. If you look at the overall journey, because I would argue that the technical agilists stepped off the agile bandwagon a long time ago.
Yep.
You know, you go to any agile conference anywhere and find the technical track.
Yep.
Good luck.
Yes, people like it was it's so much diversified now, also with infrastructure saying, okay, the DevOps movement doesn't really consider itself as a part of the agile movement. So it's also a complete different track that opened up with that world.
And you know, the DevOps movement has some of the technical stuff. I think there's more technical nous going on in the DevOps world than there is in the agile world.
Mhm.
But you can't make, if fundamentally, if the product you are building is technical in nature, if you don't master the technical skills, you're never going to make agile work.
Yep. I mean, to a degree, you have to go deeper, and you have to have a certain level of understanding at least to make agile work. Yes.
Because, you know, you think about something simple like a loosely coupled architecture, and then you look at how many monolithic solutions companies are investing in.
This is funny that you mentioned that, because actually this is the main thing that I was working on during the week, like a new format for value stream workshops and how could that look like. Now, I was lucky in the beginning that I was early on. I did value stream workshops even before they were published by Safe. And throughout the years, I did a lot of value stream workshops. And the more I did, the more I like experimented with it, deviated from the standard. But I still had the standard in mind. So I think the standard is pretty good, still pretty valid what Safe is proposing. But like now that I took my time this week sitting down, distilling the things that I tried out in different value stream workshops with a lot of different clients, and trying to come up with a new format, saying, okay, how could that fit into something that people could do right out of the box? And so what I ended up with, like, this is my latest thinking right now. Maybe tomorrow it's completely changed, but for now, it's
Knowing you, it will change completely tomorrow.
But for now, what I have in mind is saying, hey, we have to bring the disciplines together in such a value stream workshop, and we could do that. So now I have to get a little bit back from the microphone, because now I am probably more excited talking about that than before, and my level is going up.
It is going up, actually. I
So
am, in fact, going to turn you down.
okay. So what I have in mind, and um, I'm not done with thinking about that yet, but I'm at least starting creating slides, and most of the parts that I'm describing now, I've already tried out, but not in a consistent format. Um, now, if you have um, like a 2-day PI planning format, similar to like what you normally do on an HR release train, now you bring in people with different disciplines. Now, maybe there is a team of like a LACE team, responsible for the communication and collaboration structure of a larger part of the company, maybe a solution train, not just an HR release train, but maybe a couple of hundred people. And then you also have a small or medium-sized team of architects, like you have 5 or 8 architects or whatever, saying, okay, now we are responsible for the architectural part, and also like making that dynamic, so to speak, like an agile architecture. Then you have maybe people from marketing who are focusing more on a user journey, like what is the user doing together with us, and you have all these different groups, like in a way you could say similar to the Scrum teams that you have when you're setting up an agile release train. And now these different disciplines have to work out a plan together. Like there could also be a team really caring for the original idea, like the idea that Safe still proposes, saying, hey, we have also to think in operational and development value streams and how to set that up. How to reduce waste could also be something, like if you have a group just caring for waste, saying how can we reduce waste in the system. Now, when you have these people all in a room for 2 days, then the challenge would be saying, can we create a backlog of hypotheses where we actually rank different ideas against each other, how to create a better flow? Because this is essentially still what it is. Like a value stream workshop is meant to reduce waste and to propose, like to get a better flow in the whole company, or in the whole part of the company that we are caring for. And maybe also to reduce handoffs or have better handoffs, like having better APIs between parts of the systems. Now, when you bring these people together on a regular basis, like maybe every PI or every second PI, maybe like when you have a normal release train cadence for, say, a couple of sprints, like you have 5 sprints in a row, 6 sprints in a row of 2 weeks. Maybe you can do that in the 3rd sprint or in the 2nd sprint or something. And with this group that you're bringing together, and they are creating, or maybe even before that meeting, they created hypotheses of how can we get a better flow? How can we reduce waste? How can we create better value streams? And then they come together for 2 weeks, and then they are creating this backlog of things, and they are prioritizing that, creating hypotheses, leading indicators, and also ways to measure that. And in the end, they have a timeline where they say, okay, now these are the most promising things that we have in the backlogs. These are the hypotheses. These are the things that we probably have to do to make it work. Like, I don't know, build up a part of an automation that could help in a certain point. And then they are following through, and they have input for also the PI plannings of the trains that they are doing that for. Now, I think that this could be a value stream workshop format that could get the people back on track when it comes to value streams. Because like my experience is that there are a lot of companies who tried value streams in the proposed format, and they were not happy with that. Be it could be like they didn't have good coaches, they didn't have great preparation, whatever. Now, if you come around the corner saying, hey, but we could do a value stream and a value stream workshop, and then they are looking at you with like, they stare at you, no, we did that, we tried that, we don't want to do that again, then you have to do something about it. Like, you have to come up with a different idea. Why should we do another value stream workshop, and what is the effect mechanism that makes it better now that we are doing that another time? And this is like, agile release trains are working really great with like little or no innovation on your own. You're just taking the PI planning and you're taking safer teams, and that works, and this is great. Now, value stream workshops over the course of several years, I would say, are more like something that the people know about, and maybe they tried it out, but it's not like a returning effect. Like, they are not returning to value streams usually. It's not like, hey, we are doing that on a regular basis because it has so brilliantly beautiful results.
So
I don't know.
I'm gonna
What's
break
your
your flow. I'm gonna jump in. So I popped my Video Ninja link in Discord for you so that you could see what I've popped on screen. Because I've popped Eric's diagram from last week on screen. Because I think that diagram speaks to what you're talking about.
Right now, I'm
Would
only
would
seeing
would help if I actually had the
like
diagram on screen.
no, now, great.
Um, because I think what Eric was showing in this diagram is to go, you've got a whole bunch of trade-offs. When you're thinking about structure and flow, you've got to look at it through a number of different perspectives, which I think is what you're talking about when you talk about your design workshops.
Yeah.
And one of the favorite stories that I have always had in my head about, let's say, train design or development value stream design was one of the very early safe adopters. From back in the days when Dean actually went out and did leading safe classes. And it was a company called SEI. And they had Dean in. Dean did a leading safe with a bunch of their exec. And they went, let's do it. And he pitched value stream alignment. They were, of course, aligned to 5 technology horizontals, about 500 people involved. And he went, figured out with them 3 value verticals. They were based on market segment, product offering. And these guys went, let's do it all in, and we want to flip really fast. So Dean disappeared. He left Drew behind. And Drew worked with these guys. And the way they tell the story was like 2 weeks to come up with a plan and mobilize. And they went in and they just flipped the whole organization from horizontal to vertical. 500 people, bang, 3 trains, value stream alignment. And their first PI, they just absolutely kicked goals. Their product and business people were over the moon because they finally were able to ship a bunch of product. And they saw more happen in one PI than they'd seen happen in the previous year from a commercial perspective. I was like, okay, this is the best thing since sliced bread. And the second PI continued to kick goals, but they also had a whole bunch of stuff went wrong because they had these 3 verticals all sharing the same platform. And they stomped on each other's toes. And there were actually a number of critical issues introduced, right? Compromising the architectural integrity. And so the tech folk leaned back in and went, that's why we were organized the way we were. Because if you're organized like this, you're going to compromise our architectural integrity. And, it was pretty serious issues. So they went, okay, obviously we got it wrong, failed experiment. Because, better business outcomes notwithstanding, they're not great when we get egg on our face in the market with these problems. Let's go back. So they flipped back like 6 months in, went back to 5 horizontals, stayed trains, right? So they just reshaped the trains back into 5 technology horizontals, started fixing their architectural integrity issues. And they run for a PI, running quarterly PIs by the sounds of things from when they told the story. They run for a PI, start to clean up the technical pain. And then they go into another PI. And of course, what's happened is the flow of business features has slowed back to a trickle. And the commercial guys went, we're not going back to the way it was, right? Safe or not, organizing yourselves around technology means we're not getting our business outcomes anymore. And we're not happy to live with that. So you got to figure out how we can go back to working the way we were. And so at the end of the first year, they flipped back to the 3 verticals. Now they added some stuff, right? And they basically bolted on some side bubbles. So they had cross-cutting, architectural coherence groups, and it was like just little teams of, effectively architectural and design governance. to go, we're going to cut across the three trains and make sure you don't fundamentally compromise our architecture. And that was the way they made it work. Right. So and I just remember in my head at the time going, man, if you've got like 500 people, you turn them on their head, you run 6 months, you turn them on their head again, you run another 6 months, and then you go back again, right? What an amazing, you picture the potential egg on people's faces. But it was a really powerful example of overly simplistic thinking.
Yep.
Because the reality is, whatever you do with your organizational architecture, you're making a set of trade-off decisions. And
Absolutely.
if you use Eric's advice, right, and you take his model, it's a convenient one that I had on screen from last week's Miro session. You're trading off what's better for the product, what's better for the solution, what's better for the organization, what's better for the work. And whatever structure you come up with is going to be some set of trade-offs that optimize for some things and sub-optimize for others. And what you're looking
Exactly.
for in your structure is to go, what's the best set of trade-offs we can make today?
Exactly.
But at the same time, quite often, whatever you do is sub-optimized for flow, right? And you're forced down the sub-optimization for flow because the various constraints that exist in the system mean that you have to pick a structure that is not flow optimized. Now, those constraints might be political. I've been there. They might be technical. All right, we've got some system that's held together by band-aids. There's no way we can deploy out the people who work on that system into a streamlined structure because the band-aids will break. Okay.
Mhm.
So I've got to do a technically aligned organization there. The question I think for me is always to say, if I picked a set of trade-offs today and I know that what I've done is I've sub-optimized for flow, who drives the agenda that shifts the trade-offs to enable us to make a better set of trade-off decisions that are less suboptimal for flow in the future? And maybe that's political wrangling. Maybe it's not needing so many band-aids. Maybe it's technical. If you look back and you go, do you follow Uncle Bob at all?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Have you watched his clean code videos?
Not all of them. Which one do you refer to?
He did a series. It was a series around full stack development years ago now, years and years and years. I used to love his videos. I used to show them to students in classes to go, this is what it means to do TDD. But he went into a bunch of videos where they were talking about structuring your code based on things that change together and literally thinking about the impact of structure on the ability for people to collaborate in the code.
This sounds like Uncle Bob. Yeah.
Right? Of course, it's Uncle Bob. At that point, you're not talking architecture, you're talking design.
Yeah.
But really fine grained, it's the stuff I used to enjoy doing when I was hands on. And it's a lot of what the pattern movement drove us towards. But if you think zooming out to an architectural perspective and you say, how can I drive my technical architecture to enable collaboration? Particularly if you play in, and I've seen a couple of companies do this where they really went crazy with domain driven architecture and domain driven design. where you put that domain-driven architecture over the top, the domain-driven architecture will fundamentally move you towards an architecture that enables flow-oriented organizational structure.
Mhm.
But you've got to have people driving that journey of whatever architectural landscape you've got, and the things like SAP and Pega and goodness knows what that's going to be in the mix there to go, how can we have a domain driven architecture? Because that will drive loose coupling along nice fracture planes in terms of concepts in our business domain, which are generally going to be aligned to flow optimization in terms of stream alignment. But they're
Mhm.
not going to happen accidentally. They're not going to happen without a deliberate investment in your architectural runway to move you down that path. And I think that's the missing piece in a lot of implementations is, they either go blindly into a stream aligned optimization that their technical architecture doesn't support and they get into a world of pain, or they go, it's impossible to go there. Therefore, they go into a technology aligned structure, but they don't do the work that's going to enable them to shift towards a streamlined structure.
Yep.
And if you took your concept of these periodic workshops, I think the question in those periodic workshops has to be, how do we shift the trade offs?
Exactly. Exactly. And like I think there are three, at least from my point of view right now, there are three fundamental flaws with the, I would say, traditional, at that point in time, it's already traditional value stream workshops. And so the one thing is that you are, when you look at larger parts of the companies, you are optimizing just for flow. And this is, I think, I mean, if you just have an agile release train or a couple of Scrum teams or agile teams, that may be okay. But when you have a larger part with hundreds or thousands of people, then of course it's necessary to have a good like fundamental flow in the company, but you have to make the trade-offs also for reactivity. Like in a way, you could say something like mean time between failure, or like how fast can we react to failures. I mean, these are measurements that we're taking in the technical area for a long time. Now, for the organizational architecture, this should also be the case. Like saying, okay, probably when we have a couple of hundred people collaborating, there are always things going out of hand. Like someone has a brilliant idea, and now this guy is doing something different than what we initially thought. Or maybe we didn't even think of something in the first place, but then it showed up during execution that we had to do something about it. Now, this guy is caring for it, but this affects other people, and maybe other people who are far away from this guy working in a Scrum team. Now, this is something that is, for me, it's a fundamental flaw, saying we are just doing trade-off decisions for creating flow. Yes, we have to have flow, but we also have to make the trade-off decisions for reactivity. How fast can we react if something is not in flow during the execution? And like having the assumption that you are setting up a value stream landscape and then everything flows and you have only to tweak it a bit during execution. Of course, there will things happen, but say we stay in a change range of like 0 to 10% or something. We don't expect a lot of things to change, so we can still stay in the flow and tweak the flow a little bit. This is just not true in larger organizations when you have several hundred people working together, because like a tiny change on one side could have a huge impact on the other side, and you will only know if you are able to react fast. Otherwise, it will just bubble up, and then you have all the problems that you could have prevented if you had known that earlier or reacted faster. So this is
So,
one
so let,
fundamental
let me
flaw.
let me test that though. Here's my test. I would argue that your ability to react is also a flow orientation.
Yes, it is.
Uh,
Absolutely.
to me, the question is, at what level do you provide things that change slowly in terms of structure? And at what, like, and thinking about that as boundaries within which you can dynamically realign? Because there's a kind of system level flow optimization, and then there's a situational flow optimization. And I think
Exactly.
effective system level optimization for flow enables the space within which you can do situational optimization because you've created the broader system that enables the situational responsiveness.
I really love that because, like, I mean, putting that in my own words, it means that you are, you probably have, when you have a larger system, you probably have parts of that larger system which are pretty stable and which you are not expecting to change that often. But within these boundary conditions of the stable parts of the system, you have to create like a lot more reactivity, reacting uh, as fast as possible to things which are bubbling up.
Yeah.
Now, this is something that is not done yet in value stream workshops. At least it's not like an explicit statement anywhere, and it's not that people are optimizing for that also. It's more like, if you have a brilliant coach who knows about that and who goes in that direction, then maybe you could have that as a side note to the traditional approach. But I think it has to be baked into the core.
I I I think the question I would have is, at what level do you have that conversation? Because I would argue in a value stream workshop, your focus is the system level structure as opposed to the situational structure. I think how you enable a situational dynamic isn't the topic of a system level workshop. The topic of a system level workshop is setting the system. And then it's a different moment in time when you say, how do we bring to life our ability to situationally respond within the boundaries that we've set at the system level?
Yes, I'm with you, and that leads me to the second flaw that I'm seeing in what we are doing, and this is that we are still under the impression that the paradigm that we have from the Toyota production model from the 1960s and 70s, saying, "Hey, we have a lot of machines in a row, and we have a pretty predictable flow of goods through the machines, and in the end, there is a value created." To what we have in real life, what I usually call messy value streams. Like, there are parts of the value streams which are pretty messy, and actually, like, the book Messy from Tim Harford really changed my view on that. It's like there has to be a certain messiness in, when you really want to be creative, and if you really want to be innovative. If you are just like happening to have a metal sheet and this is formed and reformed with a lot of machines in a row, you're not creative. It's necessary to create value, but it's not a creative process.
Well, that's the difference between a manufacturing lens and a product development lens, though, right?
Yeah, but we are still approaching value streams from a manufacturing lens. So like you can model it like steps in a row, and this is just not true.
So that's where I think if you look at a lot of the value stream mapping guidance, it will say you shouldn't have too many steps in your value stream because there might be a lot of paths through a single step. And that allows for the messiness,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
If you look at a manufacturing stream, it might have hundreds or thousands of steps because it's designed to be repeatable endlessly.
Yep.
In a product development value stream, you've got to manage the variability. And the more granularity you put into your value stream, the more that you constrain variability.
Yes, but like for instance, when you look at design thinking, now design thinking is like there are a lot of messy parts in design thinking where you don't know what you're thinking about next and what will come out of the next session.
Yeah,
But there is a certain structure to leading a design thinking workshop or working in a design thinking way. And this is something that we also have to, from my point of view, have to incorporate into value stream analysis or value stream mapping or
yeah.
identification. Because if we leave that out, the people are still under the impression that there is a right way to do it, like the right way. If you map the things in the right way, then the flow will happen automatically. And this is just not true.
Well, at the end of the day, the right way is the way that lets you see the impediments to flow. That
Yes.
that that's that that's my simple like I think looking at a flow model is a very important ingredient for the flow side of the trade-off discussion.
Yep.
You know, I again I'll go back in history. I I had a client, they launched 3 trains, right? 3 trains seems to be the magic number for tonight's stories. And it's probably linked because I remember telling them the SEI story. They they, uh, they concocted a plan with no advice other than sending some people along to a leading safe being done in a different part of the company. And on the basis of that, they went, "These are the 3 trains we're gonna have." And they got a certain distance down the path, and they panicked and went, "We should have got some help." And I got the call. And at this point, they were 3 weeks out from launching the first of the 3 trains, and they had published the dates of launch and the particulars of all 3 trains. And I rocked in and I had a look at what they were ready for with this first train, and I went, "Oh dear, you are not ready to launch." So, you know, the first wave of panic was, how do you get through the gap between your current level of preparation and the PR planning you plan to have in a few weeks? And I looked at them and I said, "You've got to shift the date." And they said, "We can't shift the date." And I said, "You've got to shift the date." And they said, "We can't shift the date." I said, "Why can't you shift the date?" And they went, "Because our executive has told their peers and the senior executive what we're doing, and that is immovable." So they launched that first train. And once we got through the panic of how on earth do you get to a launch, I looked at the train and I looked at the other trains. I went, "These really don't feel right to me, the way you've drawn the boundaries." It just didn't make a lot of sense. And I started to raise questions. I like, can we tweak it? They're like, "No, no, no, no. It's all been published. Too much egg on face." And I got to know the executive that they were talking about a little bit. I said, "Look, you know, is this really immovable?" And he went, "Who said it was immovable?" I said, "Your people did." And he goes, "Of course it's movable, right? If we don't want to put our people through pain." And so it's like, "Okay, we can move the date." And I said, "What about the boundaries of these trains?" And he went, "That's a bit harder." And I said, "Okay." And so we moved the dates around a bit. We got to the point where the 3 trains were going. And it was starting to become pretty evident by about 2 PIs in. Like everybody could see the structure was wrong. And they're like, "Okay, we've got to do something about it. We've got to do a new model." And the exec who was sponsoring it all was like, okay, I'm happy to take the hit, but how do we protect us? Like, we got to get it right this time, because it's going to be a big hit for me to go up and say we got it wrong. And I went, you're guaranteed to get it wrong again.
Yeah.
It's just going to be less wrong than the first time. And he's like, oh. So I talked him through, and I think we've talked before about decisive and the wrap format, where, the last part of the decision is prepare to be wrong, and you publish the conditions under which you change it. It's a way of kind of protecting yourself to go, we're doing something, we're acknowledging that it might be the wrong decision, and these are the conditions that would help us to know that it was wrong and re-examine. And so it's like, okay, let's structure the comms like that, but let's really think our way through it. So we did a bunch of workshops, and there was nothing quite so sophisticated as Eric's model, but we basically said, what are we going to do with the restructure? And there were three primary options on the table. We could do like A, B, or C. And I said, well, why don't we do a bunch of trade-off calls? Let's look at the 10 conditions we're optimizing for or sub-optimizing for with each one of these. And there was organizational, there was political, there was technical. There were a number of things involved. But we went through and we went, okay, these are the 10 things. And we said, okay, for each option, let's identify the things that it optimizes for and the things it sub-optimizes for, and what makes us believe that. So we came out, it was like an all-day workshop with his entire LT. And we came out, we went, okay, these are the trade-off sliders for the three different options we have on a restructure. And these are our assumptions as to why we believe the trade-offs sit that way. So then, okay, 2 weeks, go test the assumptions. Go and validate or invalidate the things that we believed in the room when we set the trade-offs like this. So they went off and they did a whole bunch of work validating and invalidating. And then we came back together and said, okay, let's now have a look. And obviously they'd invalidated some of the assumptions, they validated some, and we adjusted the sliders. And then we said, okay, now we can make a decision. But when we publish, let's actually publish all three options, the trade-off sliders that we set, the conditions that drove the trade-off sliders, and the rationale for the choice. And then let's also publish the things that would change in those sliders that would cause us to re-examine the structure again. And then we reset, rewired 3 trains, relaunched them. And I think what you're talking about is doing that routinely.
Yes, yeah, and there is the third flaw, and this is brilliant. Thank you, because like this was a brilliant story to this third flaw that I I'm constantly like having the feeling that we are doing something wrong. Now, when what we are looking at usually is an HR release train, or maybe a bunch of HR release trains in a larger train landscape. And there is this tendency that as you have the means to create a network structure within an HR release train through PI planning, that the HR release trains actually become stagnant because you want them to be a stable structure for a long time. And so you have maybe 8, 10, 12 teams on your train. And this train becomes like they are creating something like an ecosystem within themselves automatically, because it's much easier to coordinate with the other teams on the same train than with teams on other trains. Now, this actually prevents the organization to a degree. I would really say prevents the organization from creating great fracture planes, because like when you want to create a great fracture plane, it's always a trade-off decision.
Yeah.
And say, now what would happen if you are creating one or several fracture planes within an HR release train? Say you have 10 teams on the train. You bring them together regularly at PI plannings. and you're creating, you give them the task to create fracture planes, meaningful fracture planes. Now you have the business owners, you have product management, you have everything on board in a PI planning. So you can think about what would be the trade-off decisions for certain fracture planes. How can we measure that? What would be a hypothesis? What would be leading indicators? But what will happen then is that, say you're just creating one fracture plane and you have 10 teams, and this fracture plane divides the train into two parts. Now you have two parts within a train of 5 teams. Maybe they are really good at that and they are just creating an API that connects both sides of the fracture plane. Now they don't have a lot to do anymore, but this train is supposed still to be long-term stable. Now, this is actually contradicting creating great fracture planes, because if you're creating more than just one, say you're creating 2 or 3 fracture planes, then maybe you're dividing your train into like small chunks of teams, like 2 or 3 teams, and they don't have a lot in common when they are going into their next PI plannings. If they happen to create this fracture plane and like architecturally and otherwise on a solid basis in a short amount of time. Now, this is something that actually SAFe doesn't really give you any guidance on that. But when you have a larger solution train and you have, say, a couple of hundred people working together and you are creating these fracture planes, because actually fracture planes are great for for having a better flow throughout the company. Now, then you have to reshuffle the teams on a regular basis. Now, the structure, the train is not any longer the stable structure that the people have a home for eternity, but it's just like the train is useful as long as it takes to create fracture planes. Then the teams don't have anything to do with each other. Then they join other trains where they still have a lot of dependencies, and then they create fracture planes there so that you can promote flow. Now, there is, of course, this idea of incorporating team topologies into the SAFe world, but the idea of what a fracture plane actually does with an HR release train is never mentioned anywhere. And this is, I think, one of the fundamental discussions that you should have in such a trade-off workshop, like 2 days of PI planning, just for like, how can we improve our flow, reactivity, and things. And this also leads to a new landscape on a regular basis, because now you have a goal. You're creating fracture planes, you're creating APIs or other means to connect both sides of the fracture plane. Then at a certain point in time, it's stable, and then you're good to go somewhere else. Now, this is something that is not even considered anywhere in like scaling literature. At least not. I didn't find it up to now, I have to say.
I think it's where you might get into an interesting territory. Because if you think of a train as a coupling container and a PI as a batching container,
Yeah.
then arguably success with applying the principles of SAFe says you are reducing the need for coupling containers and batching containers. And in actual fact, the further you go down the path, the less you should need trains and PIs.
No, I think it's complete the opposite. And yes, thank you for that idea, because I think it's the other way around. Because now you don't have like a coupling container. The HR release train is not a coupling container, but a decoupling container. Now you bring people together deliberately to decouple work. Now, usually, like you want to get out of your monolith, whatever monolith you have, but usually you want to get out of your monolithic structure. Now, over time, of course, the system changes. And that means that you will add new features to the system, take out other features. And so the whole landscape of what you're offering to the client changes over time. Now, that also means that you have to constantly reevaluate your fracture planes or your like your strategy for preventing a monolith. That means that if a train is not a
But
coupling container,
do you need? So I'm going to argue the train is a coupling container that should enable decoupling, right?
I would say it's different. It's
It,
like a
it, it
decoupling
it is
container.
no, it's a coupling container because it says you have a set of teams that share a rhythm and a set of events and a leadership structure and a support structure, right? That's
Absolutely
what
right.
glues them together.
Yep.
You say you've got those 10, let's go back to your original example. Those 10 teams, they have to all sit and listen to the same vision speeches whilst not caring about half of what's contributed in the vision speech. That,
Right.
they have to populate a program board where they don't care about half of what's on the program board,
Yep.
right? They do a lot of wasteful collaboration because of their membership in the coupling container.
True.
Now, it's not to say that at points in time a coupling container is not a great idea, because I think at times a coupling container is an amazing idea because
Absolutely.
it gives you the vehicle of intent and the deliberate system view that helps you to generate the traction you need to drive the decoupling. But once you have become successful with the decoupling, you no longer need the coupling container. Having said that, as your system evolves, you may periodically need to re-establish coupling containers for a period of time to generate that shared traction that's going to drive the next stage of evolution. Because
Exactly.
you want the fluidity,
Exactly.
and thus you may wind up, if you think about the glue that comes with a train, you may wind up in a very different place. That you don't need that glue. The glue is needless overhead.
Yeah. But at that point in time, you may have stronger dependencies to other teams in other trains than before, because now, like, you had this 10 teams. Now you have a fracture plane dividing the train into two parts of 5 teams.
Yeah.
Now, one part, like one batch of 5 teams, now has stronger dependencies to the outside world. They had these dependencies before, but actually the dependencies to the other 5 teams was a lot stronger before, so they were a train. Now they reduce the dependencies. Now they have more dependencies to uh, maybe 3 other teams in another train. So now they have to go with them together in a
So
decoupling container to decouple that.
yeah. So you're putting in a temporal container,
Yeah, absolutely.
but then your goal eventually should be to go, I want to become more and more decoupled, so I have less and less frequent need for any form of coupling container.
I don't think so. So I think it's the other way around, because the more you are trying to create great flow in your system, and I mean, you're not doing that just for fun, you're doing that because you want to have a system that is that you can easily bring in new features. Now that means the system grows. And that also means that the system changes over time. Now, the more you are decoupling, the more you will find other ideas of how to decouple it in a better way. Now, say, for instance, you have this 10 teams in a train. Now you find this fracture planes dividing the train into two parts of 5 teams. Now, 5 of these teams go over there and have a train with other 3 teams. Now they are decoupling themselves. Now, say maybe there are like now 2 parts of 4 teams in this new train. Now you see, hey, there was a new feature which was actually brought in and which would enable or which actually makes it better to redraw the fracture plane that we had in the first place. Now, 4 of these teams go back to the original train with the other 5 teams, which are still there. And now they are redrawing the fracture plane because of a couple of new features that had come in, and now their thinking is different than before. Like, I think the more, not only I think, but like from my personal experience as a software developer, like when I'm looking at code that I've written myself, and nobody ever has touched that. I've written that myself. And I'm going through the code and I'm finding things where I can decouple the code. Of course, I'm doing that. Then at a certain point in time, maybe half a year later, I'm coming to the same area within the code base. And I think, now that I have a different view, now that there are a lot of new features in, probably I should do that in a different way. Like, it could be that simple, like you're setting up getter and setter methods in a certain way, and then half a year later you return and think, oh, maybe I should refactor that because now my personal coding standard has changed. I didn't know that when I touched it the first time, but now I know because my understanding of the system has evolved. Now that means that the more you do that, the more you will probably have the need to decouple further, because the more you have better ideas of how to create a better flow. I mean, this is just on a personal
So,
level, at least for me
so
as a software
but
developer.
what you're saying though is you're saying you've got a dynamic emergence, right?
Yeah,
Periodically, you need to create a coupling container to drive a change,
yeah,
and you should then be able to decouple it
yep,
because you should be able to get a value network, right, that forms and reforms dynamically and situationally. And the more
yeah,
loosely coupled the elements in that network, the more dynamic it is able to be in nature.
yep.
Hence my point, the notion of a train or a formal long-lived coupling container becomes redundant because you want short-lived coupling containers. And a lot of the strong coupling that comes with a train becomes much less relevant as your elements of the train become more loosely coupled. You don't need the tight coupling that you once needed. You just need dynamic patterns.
You're right. I'm with you on that. Saying the longer you're doing that, the more you're practicing that, the looser the coupling becomes.
Yeah.
Now, there is an effect which goes completely in the other direction, and at least for me, on a personal basis as a programmer. Now, the more you are using that tool, the more you have a different perception of how you can enable flow. That means that even though from a global perspective, the whole system becomes less coupled, it's a more decoupled system, the more ideas you have to even refine that in a better way. That means even though the whole system becomes more and more decoupled, and I'm with you on that, the need for these decoupling containers is higher than ever, because you will get a complete different perception of your landscape, of your architectural landscape, of what you're doing, what you're delivering. And this means that you have a much higher need setting up these temporary decoupling containers that you might call release
So,
trains.
so what you're fundamentally saying, Wolfgang, is the more decoupled you become, the more you need coupling.
In a way, this is true. I think this is true. The more decoupled you
Isn't
are, the more you have a clearer perspective on the whole system view.
no,
Because I would doubt,
that's not the the statement I made is what you're saying is the more decoupled you become, the more you need coupling.
yes, yes, but
But
yeah, yeah, you're right. You're right.
isn't that counterintuitive though?
Thank you for that, because actually I've never thought it in that way. But you're right, because like for me, the more I create a systems view perspective, the more I have the need for seeing like couplings between parts of the system that I haven't seen before.
So,
Now that is, yeah,
so the question that I'd have is, can you view that as connections instead of couplings?
yes, probably it is. Like, yeah,
Right.
this is probably the
I
better formulation.
so the argument I have is that your need for a systems view never diminishes
It grows
because
actually.
because
Yeah.
because you're trying to optimize the system.
Yeah.
And there's an extent to which, as it becomes more decoupled, it becomes more complex in terms of your ability to understand it as the system.
Exactly. Exactly.
When you introduce a strong coupling container like a train, you simplify your ability to see the system because you lock part of it in a box.
I love that. Yes. Yeah.
And you're basically saying, I'm going to have a simpler tool set, right? For the moment, I'm going to have a simpler tool set. I'm going to lock a part of the system in a box because then I've got clear boundaries and I can see what's bouncing off the edges of the box.
Yeah.
But the more well formed the elements of the system become, the more fluid your ability to model the system can be.
Exactly. Exactly.
And you can change interaction models without locking things in a box. That's my argument about evolution.
Exactly. Yes.
Which
I
which to
love
me is that's what the team topologies guys are driving at with their interaction models.
yes, exactly. So, and I think what they wrote in Team Topology is like this one paragraph where they wrote about the new paradigm of creating software is not to deliver something like a hardware similar to a hardware piece, but having a continuous interaction, a continuous exchange with the people using the software. So this also makes it necessary to react dynamically because like when you are not seeing software as something that you're creating, then you put that out like a piece of hardware, but that this is a continuous interaction with the people on the other side of the screen, and you're taking things out of their like application, you're bringing new features in, you're changing the whole world all the time, then you need these more dynamic forms of like coupling and decoupling, so that you like internally that you are fit for the exchange with the outside world.
So Eric's obviously listening from the airport lounge. I just glanced over at Stream Chat and he says coupling exists, pushing it out of the code and into the human system creates future benefits. Which
Thank you, Eric.
it's a nice concept in terms of going de decrease the technical coupling, which enables you to increase the human coupling. Oh, that could be very risky, couldn't it?
But
Talking about
I love
coupling when it comes to humans, we're getting into dangerous territory.
but, but yes, I mean, and I think this is right, Eric. This is really true because like what you want to have is reactivity. Now this is a thought that I hadn't had, and thank you for that comment because now I had a different thought of that. Because what you want to do is you want to be more reactive. Now having like code is not really very reactive. Of course, you can change code, but it just takes a while. But when you can decouple the code so that it's more on the interaction level of the people, then you are much more reactive because the interaction between people can be much more reactive than changing code. And so, yes, I think this is exactly where it goes.
So I'm going to go meta on you for a second because I think we've. Oh, there we go. Um, Eric was saying he's about to suggest dependencies instead of coupling, but that's a different set of issues. I'm going to argue for a language of connection. Because to me, I distinguish between connection and coupling. Um, because when I think of coupling, I think about something that is more long lived and static in nature. When
Hmm.
I think of connection, I think about something that's more dynamic in nature. And
Yeah.
and I haven't gone and looked at dictionary definitions. I'm just talking about my personal reaction to those words. um, but I was going to go a little bit meta and say when it comes to reactive and systems, and this is kind of a hint for what happens when we start to talk about our book club. One of the things that, in my reread of Sengi and the Fifth Discipline, the section I've just been reading has been really emphasizing the disconnect in time between an action and its effect being evident in the system.
Yeah.
And that what we often see as, and he calls proactive behavior often a sin because it tends to be event driven rather than system driven. And you often introduce a short term response that has a long term consequence, but you can lose your ability to view the long term consequence. And I think this is one of the interesting things when you get into this dynamic stuff
Yeah.
is, you know, the more you change the system, the more dynamic the system, the harder it is to evaluate the long term impacts of the changes you make. Because the system's changed and changed and changed by the time you're able to see the impact felt.
Yes, I think there are more layers than that because like you could argue from like in to the opposite when you have a monolith and you're changing something in the monolith and then you may not even know what breaks in the monolith on another part. So I'm with you that the more you decouple, the more loosely coupled the system is, the more, like the longer it could take until you realize what actually happens when you're changing something. But on the other hand, the more decoupled the system is, the more transparent the interactions are. Now, the interactions can be manifold, and there can be a lot of different interactions on different levels in a complex system, but at least they are transparent. And when you have a monolith where the interactions are not transparent because you don't have good fracture planes and good APIs and things, then it can be it can also like the whole system can crash just because you're doing something that you haven't seen the consequences of doing that.
I think it's where you start to get into one of the trade offs. Oh, hang on. Here we go. Eric's going now. He's typing away. Yeah, humans can remix themselves. They can change the way they rely on the fly and responsively. The code can't. It requires outside action to be remixed. True, right?
Thank you, Eric.
Um, the question that I would put out there, though, is it's much easier for us to see the way the code changes than the way humans change. At the end of the day, it's one of the benefits of a train, right? Because you get this nice, strong coupling container, it's much easier to study,
Yeah.
right? The simplest possible example of that is the red string on an artboard.
Yep.
Um, the interactions between the teams, the things that happen at a scrum, is like your ability to observe the system, which is a train, is high. It's one of the benefits it gives you. It's why it can
Mhm.
be such a powerful tool for change if you are observing the interactions.
Yes.
It's become a lot harder in the virtual world. I think back to the days when, pre-COVID, particularly with a co-located train, it was very easy to study the system. You could study the foot traffic on the floor. You could see the
Yeah.
patterns of people moving between teams.
Yep.
Uh, you could see it visually. And I think that's one of the challenges as we've gone to this virtual world is we can't see the human interactions nearly as easily as we once did.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yes, yes. Uh, there were now a lot of thoughts while you were speaking, so I have to get that straight first. But yes, like what you said, I can absolutely go with what you said. So, I mean, to be creative, there is a certain messiness necessary, and it may not be like it may be a different messiness than what we had in the past when people met in a workshop room. Now they are meeting online and they are doing work from home. But it like you have to facilitate that in a different way. But it, if you are out for creating an orderly environment where everyone is just executing the step that is given to them, and then there is the next step coming and this is executed by another person, like essentially what we have when we put machines in a row, then probably there is not a lot of use for agility. Now when we
Mm,
say, hey, with a network structure, when we are setting up a network structure with a nature release train or a scrum team, and we want to facilitate a certain messiness, a certain level of messiness, then I think, yes, this has to be completely, like the facilitation of this messiness has to be completely different now in the post-COVID world than before.
it's got to be very mindful. My
Hmm.
observation is a lot of companies that chase this dynamism don't put the mitigations in place for the messiness.
Yes.
So if you think about literally just reforming a team,
Yep.
I love self-selecting teams. I think self-selecting teams is an awesome thing. Every time I've had a chance to do it, I've loved it. I've learned a
Yep.
couple
Me
of
too.
very hard lessons along the way, but I've always loved it. Years ago, we were asked back when I was still in partnership with M. Campbell Pretty. We were
Hmm.
asked by a US friend, said, "Hey, we've got a train in Australia. They're on PI 20 and be interested in a outsider's viewpoint on where they're up to." And I was busy, so M went, and it was like, "Oh, it's going to be cool." Because back then, like a train that got to PI 20, that was like, wow, we'd never seen a train get that far before back then. So M went, and I debriefed with her when she came back, and she said they do self-selecting teams every PI. They're 20 PIs in, every PI they do self-selecting teams. They look at the backlog for PI, they do self-selecting teams. And I went, oh man, that's amazing. And she said, no, it was horrible. There was no gel whatsoever. None of the teams knew how to work with each other. They'd never found any rhythm because they were constantly turning themselves on their ear. And whether you're reshuffling teams or constellations of teams, how do you make sure that you're managing the mess that goes with that?
Yes.
So, if I look at sort of my favorite book on, you know, self-organizing teams was Richard Hackman. leading teams, setting the stage for high performance.
Mhm.
Have you read that one?
No, no, but I will.
I'll just uh, put it in the stream chat and do a few typos. So it was a book that Esther Darby put me onto, and I read it and I went, man, I've read a lot of books on teamwork and self-organizing teams, and nothing has ever touched that. And it wasn't an agile book. Hackman was a Harvard professor who studied team dynamics for a stupid number of years. And the case study that he ran in the book was actually on airline crews. So he fundamentally, it was his whole premise was, how do you create the conditions that enable high performing teams to emerge? And the airline crew was a really good example, because an airline crew typically is only a team for the length of a flight. So fundamentally, that team comes together as they board the plane, and then they disperse at the end of the flight. So you get a very short lived team. And an underlying premise that he had pretty much across the board was that what happens in the formational moments of a team sets the tone for its future possibility. And unless you are very deliberate in the way you bring that team together, um, you're missing an opportunity. And he literally, he kind of drew this timeline, and he said, after this point in the team's life, no matter how good or bad the manager or the coach, there's only so much you can do to change their trajectory.
Yep.
And when he was looking at the airline crews, right, and he played, because I think it was Southwest, there was one uh, airline that tried to keep long lived crews. And they
Mhm.
built a little bit of a slack into them, but fundamentally, there would be a crew that stuck together flight after flight after flight, where pretty much every other airline, the crew changed flight to flight. And he talked through some of the pros and cons of, and I'm pretty sure it was Southwest from memory now, and some of the things that happened because of these long lived crews there, despite the fact that they had to do an awful lot of logistics work to keep these long lived crews together. Then he talked to the other ones, and he went, the biggest signal difference that you could tell in the performance of the crew was whether or not they spent time deliberately in a pre flight team formation session or not. It was the single biggest indicator, was what they did to establish themselves, even as a team that was only going to be a team for the duration of a flight, would set the scene for the way they would then perform as a team while they operated the flight. And I think the early agile days, back to the beginning of our discussion today, or the wonderful little team charter thing that Eric shared with us last week, they we used to be really, really deliberate about team inception.
Mhm.
And Hackman goes on to talk about the fact that one of the things you've got to do is explicitly set the team norms.
Mhm.
Because he fundamentally says, if you don't explicitly set your norms, what will happen is you will inherit the lowest common denominator of people's previous norms.
Yep.
Every member of the team will come and they'll bring the norms of their previous team. And then what will happen is you will go through a period where you settle, and what will emerge will generally be the lowest common denominator.
Yes.
And we used to play with social contracts. But then, there's so many social contracts, they're written and then forgotten, as opposed to written and lived. And a little bit of this, I think, ties to the dilution of the perception of the value out of Scrum Masters, because we once upon a time, that was what, a good Scrum Master would do, a team inception. They would be really focused on setting the team for success. And I think one of the things that becomes challenging is when you start to go dynamic, are you going to take the time to reset your teams, like to do the team inception stuff every time you reform? Much like
Yep.
when we do trains, right? We do train inception stuff. If you're going to reform trains and you're going to blend trains and dynamically re-emerge and reshape them as your fracture planes shift, are you going to take the time every time you do that to do the rebase? Who are we? What's our shared vision? Or are you
Yes.
just going to go, now you're a new team? Welcome. And I think this is one of the challenges. And again, it's one of the appeals of the long lived structure. The appeal of the long lived structure is, you do it and then you roll with it, because everybody resents when you go, hey, I want half a day for team inception. And to me, half a day's kind of bare base to launch a team. And everybody looks at the cost and goes, oh, you want that again? Can we just tell people they're part of a new team? So I think you got to play with these things. And this is
I
one of the
like
trade offs, right?
A- Absolutely. So Eric wrote two things in the chat. So the first is he wrote, Rayleigh did that optional remix every 6 to 8 weeks, but it wasn't a blow up, just an evolving shape. And I think this is also one of the key ingredients. Like if you are not completely reshuffling the teams every time, but you just happen to have like one or two additional team members in, then there is a certain culture that preserves itself over time. And like when you are a newbie to already stable team, then probably you will orient yourself more to the norms that are already established in the team because you want to be a part of the team or you want to fit in. I think this is also something that has to be handled with care. And the other thing is like, where is it really harmful to reshuffle? Like on a team itself, when you have a Scrum team, you are essentially reshuffling every day. You have your dailies, and then you think about with whom do I have to work today to get my tasks done. Now on an HR release train, this is obviously a complete different layer, and it's harder to remix all the people on a train. But what about two teams? What about three teams? Like, is that a size where you could reshuffle? And what are the consequences? So I think reshuffling is always a question of how many people are changing and how large the scape is, the area is in which I'm changing. You are showing something here, Mark.
I am showing something, and I'm going to go on a segue that the common wisdom is that if you change one member of a team, it's a new team. So, so there's no question of scale, right? What I'm showing is a diagram from Hackman's book. So
Mm-hmm.
this was his full model in response to Eric's comment about inception, pervasive common language, and solid organizational defaults. The Hackman model was the one that I've got on screen.
Yep.
So he basically said that at the middle of it, you have to have an enabling structure, a compelling direction, a real team. And he described a real team. You've actually got to know who's on the team. An enabling structure, you've got to have the skills on the team that it needs to fulfill its mission and a clear connection to the organization.
Yeah.
And a compelling direction is you've got to actually have something meaningful to do. He goes on, he talks about needing a work design for the team, um, a lot of really great stuff on the fact that you need a very proactive orientation in the team charter. The social norms must include challenge and active scanning. But yeah, it's pretty important. So,
I love that. And Eric wrote another thing, Inception plus pervasive common language.
which was what triggered me to go to this. Right, Inception, pervasive common language, solid organizational defaults. Uh, don't turn up
Yeah.
in this model explicitly, but it's very much the pieces of the puzzle.
So I'm with you that like if you change one person, then there is a new team. But actually, I think there is like a certain effect if you just change one person, and then it's not like there is already an alignment between the other people on the team because they were together for a longer time, and there is one new person coming in. So of course they have to find a new alignment because now it's a new team because there is one other person. But as the others have already an alignment on what they did before, it's probably easier to find an alignment also with this new person coming in.
But how many of those teams stop and have a session with that new person and say, "Hey, let's talk about who we are as a team, the way we work as a team." If you think about something like a social contract, one of the first rules of a social contract is you can't have something in the social contract every team member's not signed up to.
Yeah,
So
I'm with you.
if 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 you have a new person, you've got to re-examine your social contract or your working agreements and revalidate them. Because if you've got something there that that new member is unwilling to commit to, they're going to break your team. The team can
Yes.
no longer live to its working agreements. That
Yeah.
that person is going to be unaware of all kinds of, because that team's they've formed a shared strategy, the way they work together, the various connections and interactions, the go-to people for certain information. There's all these unspoken things about that team. And yeah, you change one member, as often as not, it's like, here, grab your tasks.
So I think that changing is not a value on its own. It's just like a trade-off decision at a certain point in time saying, if we want to if we want to stay in flow, and we could maybe better stay in flow better if one person changes the team, then there is the trade-off decision saying, okay,
Yeah.
if we have a new member, then we have to do housekeeping, and to do housekeeping means there's an overhead. But is this overhead actually justified by the value that we're getting out of it because we can stay in flow better?
But that at the end of the day, that's the cost of the change.
Yeah.
Right? You're trading it off going, is the disruption to the team or the pause we need to do a mini reinception with the new member, is that worth the temporary benefit that we're going to gain? And the answer
Yeah,
may well be yes, but then you've got to go, I'm going to pay the price.
exactly, absolutely.
And
And
too many organizations, I think, go, I'm going to put the member on the team because that's going to be better, but I'm not going to pay the price.
yes,
At,
and we
at which
don't
point
have
you're compromising your team.
I'm with you, completely with you. Like if we are changing from a static agile world to a dynamic agile world, then there is a price to pay. It's not coming for free. But the question always is like, do we have a good habit of making these trade-off decisions? And this is what leads me back to where we started with like this new idea or this new form of value stream workshop that I'm working on, and that I have in mind now. Probably you only get into the habit of making these trade-off decisions if you are making them on a regular basis, that you have to practice them, you have to do them on a regular basis. Now if we are not proposing something, this is my personal belief, if we are not proposing a format, like something that people can maybe use out of the box, like the Scrum framework or like a PI planning in Safe, if we are not proposing a format where they can like hone their craft, like get a better habit of doing these things, then probably if you don't have like a brilliant agile coach who's stepping in and teaching you that individually, then you will not get there. And this is where I'm struggling with, like, what is a good format for introducing that habit, maybe on different scaling levels, like on a large scale with several solution trains within a solution train, within a nature release train, within a solution area. But this is something that I think if we want to stay in flow in a larger endeavor, then we have to create these habits.
Yeah. So, having just glanced at my watch, I'm going to
Thank you.
suggest I've probably given you some new slides to write.
Oh, yes, you did. I
And
will sit down tonight.
I don't know that we intended 2 hours on this topic when we started, but it was fun.
It was. And thank you, Eric, for writing your comments.
So I think we've learnt a new convention that says you have to watch the chat because it's on the screen that I'm not looking at actively.
And
Uh,
there's one thing that we have to clarify before we end the stream, and this is the book club that we want
yes,
to do.
that's what I wanted to switch to.
Great.
So weekly. In
Quickly.
my head, it's weekly. We set ourselves a goal that says this is the bit we're going to read that week, so we're ready to talk about it. I figure I will set up a Miro for the book club so
Great.
that if we have notes, because I like to read and highlight and then synthesize back to notes, I figure if we've got that, then we've got something to anchor to when we want to talk. I have a problem with the fifth discipline that I seem to be highlighting more than I'm not highlighting, so my synthesis is going to be a challenge. Uh, I've I've got like page after page where I've highlighted half the page. It's crazy. But if at the moment we've got you, me, Dave, and I think we sucked Eric into the vortex as well, I think we're all going to have a challenge in terms of going, can we keep ourselves at a similar pace on it? Uh,
Yep.
Mind you, I will say it's not a book you read at rapid fire pace because you've got to do a lot of thinking as you read it.
Yes. Indeed.
But picking a day. So I threw a couple of options out as the regular day for it. Did you
Mhm.
have a preference in those options?
I'm pretty flexible at the moment, so not really. I mean, if Eric or Dave have a preferred option, I can go with that.
So you mentioned, I think you're traveling somewhere for work this week.
Oh, just to Munich, so I'm staying in the same time zone. So on Thursday, Wednesday I'm traveling, and Thursday I'm coming back.
Does that mean you wouldn't be able to make Thursday evening?
So Thursday evening my time, I could be available. It depends on when the train arrives, but so I will in the afternoon return.
So my memory was the time zone for you that I suggested was about 10 p.m.
That would fit nicely.
I did a balance across all the time zones and it was like early morning for you, evening for you guys seemed to be because we want something that's out of work hours in case one of us is client facing.
Yeah,
But if Thursday night works for you, I'm going to go ahead and schedule Thursday night.
yeah, right.
And I figure we'll work it out as we go. We've iterated all of these things. But
Yeah.
if we start with, we've all read the bit we've agreed, and there's a Miro there, and I'll put a link in the thread for the Miro once I create it, where we can drop our thoughts.
Hmm.
And
So
then we can
do
just,
you have, yeah,
do I
what?
have what?
A scope in mind for what we have to read until Thursday?
It's in the
So
thread.
you said something like 100 pages or something.
Yeah, so the books, the way I figured it was if we take about a month, right? So a month means that if we do a weekly 1 hour chat, then you any book we take, and most of us would not normally take a month to read a workbook. But if we if we do it over a month, then fundamentally we're signing up to, a quarter of the book per week,
Yep.
and we're keeping the books rolling through at a reasonable pace.
Mhm.
So I looked at the table of contents, rough size of sections. I put in the streaming thread, the suggestion I had as to the logical cut point for the first 100 pages or so, and I'm most of the way there on my reread, and I'm loving it. It's it's amazing how you take a book that really hit you the first time you read it, and then you read it 10 or 15 years later, and you go, "How did I miss so much?" It's just there's so much you weren't ready to see, and I think the moment that most hit me on that was his dissection of the beer game. So the beer game was really fresh in my head because I quite literally, when I was doing the LPM boot camp, I was looking for how do I get a simulation into the mix. And I'd gone and I thought maybe I'd do the beer game. And I've never actually facilitated the beer game. I've often thought I'd love to. And so I'd gone and I'd read some facilitation guides. I'd played through my head the possible learnings of the beer game in a lean portfolio management context. I'd wound up going, no, it doesn't quite work in terms of the way it would fit and the learnings it generates for a boot camp because it's probably a little bit further down the track than that. But I had a whole bunch of stuff that I'd read on how to facilitate it and what learnings you're trying to draw out. And then I read Sengi's dissection of it and his learnings, and I went, oh, he's just on a different level.
So I wonder how my encounter with with the fifth discipline will happen. Now with team topologies, I made similar experiences when I read it the first time. And this was not 15 years ago. It was just a couple of years ago. Like when it came out, I read it, and now I reread it. It was a complete different book. Like there were things in which I couldn't remember. Really?
So that's why last week you were quoting chapter numbers. That moment where you're like, oh, fracture planes, it's chapter 6. I'm like, dude, how did
Exactly.
you remember that it's chapter 6?
I'm constantly working with it. So right now, it's like I have that with me wherever I go, at least in on my Kindle. So and I'm constantly shuffling pages there.
All right. So Thursday night, 100 pages or
Great.
so in the thread on the Discord server is the stuff to read. New streaming show.
Yes. I love it.
Hey, something I want to put in your head, by the way,
Yep.
and this is probably a general chat with all of us, and the closing note for tonight. I was talking to a new RTE on Monday, and he said to me, Mark, where do I go to learn? Point me to the best place. He says, I've been going to the meetups, and to be honest, I'm not getting very much out of them. There was one that Andy Sales did on flow accelerators, and that was amazing. But every other meetup I've gone to, I've just got nothing out of, and I'm really keen to grow into my role. Yeah, where do I go? And of course, I said I'll go read my blog. But then what I wanted to say was, hey, come to Shaping Agility. And then I went, no, a new RTE is just going to get lost in the conversations we have.
Could be. Could be.
Well, would be. Right. We go on rambling dissections of coupling versus containers and layered loops of maps of organizations and relationships and goodness knows what, right? We naturally in our Saturday sessions we head pretty abstract. And I think as we start to talk about different adding new shows to the stream other than the Saturday night show, I think we should start to think about what we want to do in terms of adding a show and some content that is more appropriate to perhaps a beginner to a intermediate practitioner than
I love
only the experts.
so like shaping agility 101.
Well, we've got to find some topics where we don't necessarily obsess about fracture planes or dynamic reorganization or coupling containers
Mm.
or the changing purpose of the RTE course. Maybe get back a little bit into some 101 about core practices that are going to help you go from sort of just getting your feet to feeling pretty good about it in a RT or product manager or product owner, the kind of the real practitioner content.
I would love that. So Eric wrote easily accessible content? Crazy.
This is possibly reinforced by the conversation I had on Friday with a coach I'm mentoring who is one of our trial watchers for our staff. And he's like, I'm watching the LPM discussion you and Eric had, and I'm 19 minutes in, and I've watched the first 19 minutes 3 times because I watched it once and then I had to go and Google a whole bunch of articles so that I understood some of the things you were talking about. And then I watched a second time and I went and Googled a couple more articles. And then the third time through, it's great, but it's going to take me a while to get through the video. And I was like, I love mentoring somebody who's that thirsty for knowledge. That's fun.
Oh yeah.
But uh, if we want to really scale our impact, we can't just always be talking to the experts.
Yeah. Like
So,
creating a backlog of what would be the most basic stuff to talk about, like the most important basic stuff to talk about. That would be great. Yeah.
so yeah, a few new topics in the streaming backlog. I think maybe we'll create a second frame for. Maybe we'll shift to a frame per TV series. We can start to build backlogs for different shows that we'll have on the stream on a weekly basis,
Great. Yeah.
and maybe we'll be crazy as Eric suggests. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to get a sound effect library so that every time you say fracture plane or some other crazy buzzword, and maybe we make sounds for each other and we can start beeping each other for
Yeah.
getting too abstract.
This would be a cool add-on. Like having a sound library here on my stream deck. Thank you. Yeah.
All right, my friend. I reckon that
It-
is a wrap. So,
so
so Eric wants to know what's the why. I think the why should be in the entries that we put in our streaming backlog ideas. What and why got to be part of the topic proposal.
yeah.
Buzzword.
Buzzword.
Matt, you were the one who said what and why. I can't buzz you while you're sitting listening to us. Alrighty. I
Thank
am
you.
going to call it a wrap because it's 5 to 2, and I have to turn my brain off before I can try and sleep.
Absolutely.
Fun as
Thank
always,
you.
Wolfgang, and I'll see you Thursday night, your time.
See you.